South Africa is well known for its hominin. Oh gosh, look at me. Hominin. Is that how you say it? Hominin. Look at me. I'm asking my guest. She's an expert at this. Hominin fossil record. But recent DNA results of remains of a 2,000-year-old boy that was found in Ballito Bay in KwaZulu-Natal during the 1960s might now help rewrite human history. The unveiling, or the University of Johannesburg collaborated with Uppsala University in Sweden, as well as Wits University, to do research on the genome of the child and reconstructed it, as well as the 6 other individuals that were also found in KwaZulu-Natal who lived between 2,300 and 1,800 years ago. The researchers have found that 3 of these Stone Age individuals who lived between these periods are genetically related to the descendants of the Khoi-San groups living in the southern Africa today. So let me bring my expert in on this, Stephanie Baker. She's the manager and spokesperson of the research laboratory at the Center of Anthropological Research at the University of Johannesburg. It's good to have you. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for helping me out with some of these words.
No problem.
As difficult and as tongue-twisting as some of the words, and this is a phenomenally interesting story. It really is. So, the 2,000-year-old boy's remains, as we say, found in the 1960s. The genome was reconstructed. DNA is looked at. Why now? Why has it taken so long to do all of this?
Well, it's one of these situations where you're looking at technology finally catching up. So we only now have the technological advances to reconstruct ancient DNA. So now really is where you're going to see a lot of this kind of research coming out, where we can go back to fossils found decades ago and reanalyze them for their DNA and find out more about their story and how they contribute.
This is fantastic. And this new development within science, is this a South African technology and scientific finding?
Unfortunately not, but hopefully in the near future. So that's why researchers from the University of Johannesburg, specifically Professor Marlies Lombard, contacted Uppsala University because it was her who drove the research to then analyze and use their technology to look at South African finds.
Okay, so that's how that collaboration came between Uppsala UJ and Wits University. So we're talking about something that is about to change the course of human history. How? What are we finding?
So we're finding out that in actual fact, human history is far more complicated than what we had originally thought. We had placed humans as emerging as the species Homo sapiens at 200,000 years ago. But this DNA evidence now says that that divergence from other species within the Homo genus actually happened 350,000 years ago. So quite distinct.
So we're older than we think we are.
Much older.
350,000 years. So that's this is a massive finding. It really is. I mean, what does that do to previous research? Obviously, this is still being looked at, though.
It is. And the fun thing is now it starts everyone fighting. And everyone has the nice scientific arguments that they bring to the table. The fun thing about this particular find, though, is it really does justify a lot of the stone tool technologies that we've been finding on the landscape, and also some of the other finds that we found. So Florisbad near Bloemfontein, for example, is famous for a skull that was found 260,000 years, and that shows Homo-like qualities, so Homo sapiens. And so it really validates that. Amazing.
This link between the discovery of the genetic relation between 3 Stone Age individuals and the Khoi-San groups living in southern Africa today. What does this mean? What's this finding about?
So that's great because it really validates that the Khoi-San are the first peoples that we recognize as modern population groups to have lived in southern Africa. And it's only much later that we have movement from West African and East African pastoralists moving down to South Africa and then mixing with the Khoi-San to have the groups that we have today, the Bantu-speaking groups.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So according to this research, the DNA could be used to estimate the split between modern humans and earlier human groups. You have to explain this to us. Now, what does that mean to me and everybody else watching?
Right. So a couple 100,000 years ago, there was not just one species. So we're quite unique in that there's just Homo sapiens on the landscape today. But back in our ancient past, that wasn't the case. There were a lot of different human-like species and our close ancestors and relatives on the landscape at the same time. And what we can say is that our specific lineage, our family tree, split off from those other groups at around 350,000 years ago now, much later than, or earlier rather than we had thought. But that doesn't mean that the other groups weren't around at the same time. So Homo naledi is a good example of this, the recent find. They obviously were on the landscape at the same time as us. And now what science needs to do is investigate how much interaction we had, who was responsible for what stone tools, and things like that. So it's going to be a very exciting time for us here in South Africa.
It's exceptionally exciting. But, you know, I suppose we're all, as you say, now the battle begins. And there's always been this battle. Homo sapiens, I mean, did life originate here in Africa? Were the first Homo sapiens in South Africa? In Africa, on the African continent.
Yes, so definitely in South Africa, we have emergence of Homo sapiens. And the interesting thing now is we also have evidence of Homo sapiens arising in Morocco, again at 300,000 years ago, and in East Africa. So Africa is definitely the platform for modern human evolution.
And there's no disputing that. I mean, has anybody ever disputed that and say, no, it's...
There are recent claims where they have very Homo sapien-like evidence from Europe now, and there's been a lot of fights again about that in the science community because they're very isolated specimens, but nonetheless they don't discredit that what we really need to do is reevaluate what we know, which is a constant thing within science, I suppose, that we always have to look again and again and again at what we know and reevaluate it. But it's definite that Africa played a seminal role in the evolution.
Fantastic. Really, really interesting. What's the next step now? Where do you sort of go from here?
Oh, goodness. So now I think what we really need to do is look back at other finds that we have from the Stone Age and start to see if we can look at DNA, ancient DNA from those individuals, see if they add more to the story. But also start focusing, I think, for the Middle Stone Age at least, that period in the interior of southern Africa, because that really has been overlooked. A lot of these finds, as you say, Ballito Bay, are all coastal, and it'll be very interesting to see what's happening in the middle of South Africa and what can the Highveld bring to the storyline.
Fantastic. Well, looking forward to it. We'll keep up with all of that. Talking to us about this, Stephanie Baker, the manager and spokesperson of the Research Laboratory at the Center of Anthropological Research at the University of Johannesburg. Thanks. Keep up the great work.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
An absolute pleasure.